The President, please be seated. The court is now back in session. We would like to now hand over to Judge Cartwright to continue putting questions to the experts.
Yes, thank you, President. At the end of the part of my examination that concerned your physical assessment of Nguyen Chia, you made some recommendations that might improve his health and his comfort, and you have also just clarified that he does not currently suffer from any mental illness, nor does he have an unusual degree of cognitive impairment for someone of his age. Can you just summarise any remaining matters that form your conclusions, please?
The only remaining matter was that we felt both on physical and mental health grounds that there was nothing in our opinion, there were no problems in our opinion that would affect his ability to exercise the capacities outlined in the Struger case in relation to his fitness to plead and stand trial.
And in your conclusions, you repeat the concerns about reading difficulties and also your findings that he has no significant concentration or attention problems. Can you summarise, please, your view of his ability to concentrate during a normal session which lasts about 90 minutes, as you have indicated?
So our view was that there were no problems, significant problems in attention or concentration if the length of time is 90 minutes. Two of our interviews lasted around 2 hours, and there were no obvious problems in attention or concentration during those interviews.
Thank you. Now,
Sorry, I think Professor Campbell has something to add.
I was just going to comment in relationship to his physical frailty. It's very important that he be maintained as active as possible, physical activity. That's both to maintain his physical reserves, and there's also some evidence that physical activity maintains cognitive function as well.
Thank you. Are there any matters that either of you would wish to comment on that I have not touched on in my summarising of your report prepared for this hearing?
Not from my point of view. I think it's been very comprehensively covered. Thank you.
No.
Thank you. President, that concludes the questions that I wish to put to the experts, at least for the moment. Thank you.
The President, thank you, Judge Cartwright. Do other judges of the bench wish to put questions to the experts? I know that there is no such question. Now the Chamber would like to hand over to counsels for Mr. Nguyen Chia to put some questions to experts, if you would wish to do so.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Your Honours. Good morning, Professor Campbell. Good morning, Dr. Fazal. It seems that most observations that you have made today and earlier in your report are in conformity with our own observations of our client. However, we do have a few additional questions to put to you. The first subject I would like to speak to you about is the degree of fatigueness caused by the transport of Nguyen Chia from the prison cell to the holding cell. It is this fatigueness that seems to worry our client the most. And I have noticed that you haven't examined Nguyen Chia after such transport from the prison cell to the holding cell. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the degree of fatigueness and his ability after that to actively participate from the holding cell and listen to the procedures?
As I've commented earlier, his physical frailty is such that even everyday tasks leave him tired. Our suggestion is that the move is made 15 to 30 minutes before the court session starts, which would give him ample opportunity to recover.
Okay. But my question was rather whether you should have examined him also after an effort equivalent to such transfer to really be able to observe properly the effects of such a transfer.
I really don't think that would make any difference to the conclusions. We did see him after some physical activity, but the physical activity is him shifting to a stretcher and then being transferred across here on a stretcher. So I do not feel the degree of physical activity is particularly great.
Thank you for answering this question. My second question, and it's sort of a follow-up question on this subject, is the degree of his capacity to concentrate all day. Obviously, I'm not a medical expert, but I presume there is a difference between, on the one hand, your face-to-face examination, direct examination of Nguyen Chia during a few hours, and on the other hand, of course, the first hand requiring him to actively participate and answer your questions, and on the other hand, the passive participation in a holding cell by just listening to a witness giving testimony all day. There might be a difference in the capacity to concentrate in those various circumstances. Could you please elaborate on that?
We will both comment on that question. My own view is that the active, what you described as the more active participation, which was during our interviews in which he answered questions, my own view is that requires a higher level of concentration than what you describe as a passive experience of listening to witnesses and making possibly notes mentally or otherwise about what witnesses say. So I think that all we can do is try and draw on what we assessed and then try and think about how that would affect his capacity during a day-long court procedure or process. And our view is that because he concentrated quite well during these active interviews, which two of them were on the same day. One was in the morning, followed by another one in the afternoon of the same day, that was a good sign, that a clear sign to us that he was able to concentrate all day in what I think is a less demanding task of listening to the court process. Professor Campbell.
Yes, I would certainly agree with that. Certainly when one is passive in a procedure, it is much easier for one's mind to wander, but that occurs irrespective of one's mental state. It occurs with anyone.
It happens to me all the time. Now, following up on this, these two issues, in our submissions we have touched upon the possibility, the technical possibility, to have as an alternative, to have a video link stored from his prison cell, so as to give Nguyen Chi the possibility to, if he doesn't feel able to move from his prison cell to the holding cell, to be able to listen to the proceedings from his prison cell. Does your investigation make you conclude that that could be a proper alternative for him to be actively participating in these proceedings?
It is a possibility, but we've not been convinced about the necessity of it. Would also have the disadvantage that he would be further away from you yourself, his defence counsel, and more difficult to interact.
Okay, thank you for answering that question. I'm moving on to a completely different subject. That is his short-term memory. Is it possible that during the 4 or 5 weeks period of his acute bronchitis, his short-term memory was substantially affected?
Our impression from one of the people who was looking after him was that when he was acutely ill with the bronchitis, he had an episode of delirium. Now, delirium is a limited period of confusion, and once the acute illness is settled, the delirium normally clears. And our understanding of it is that the delirium cleared. So there's no permanent effect from that.
Another question in relation to the short-term memory. As you are aware, specifically the National Council and the case manager in this case have been speaking to Nguyen Chi in the last 5.5 years almost daily. And it is their observation that there has been a decline in the short-term memory. Also, so not only during the acute bronchitis period, but also before. To give you one example, he would continuously ask the case manager, time and time again about the court schedule of the same day. Have you been able to really extensively and properly investigate his decline in short-term memory within these 3 sessions that you have had?
Well, I think it's not inconsistent with our findings because there is an aging process also, and with age, memory declines very, very gradually. If there's an illness like dementia, it declines much more rapidly. So our view would be that he has a normal aging process where you would expect some decline in short-term memory. What our assessment focused on was whether that was abnormal, whether it reached a degree of severity that you would call it dementia or early dementia. And our view was that it wasn't at a level that was severe, or you would be clinically worried, or you would even call it early dementia. It was our view that it was a normal aging process, and therefore his memory will decline very gradually, and it will continue to, as you would expect any normal 86-year-old man. Anything you want to add? No.
Thank you. Another question I have is in relation to the 4 or 5 weeks period of his acute bronchitis when he was in hospital. At one point, or maybe at 2 or 3 points even, during this acute bronchitis, he was seriously thinking that he was going to die. Not only did he say that in speech to his direct family, at one point he also called upon his family to gather around him so to enable him to say goodbye to his family. I won't go into detail on all the other things that he has said, but it seemed that during that period he really felt that the end was there. Now obviously he has recovered, fortunately so, but would it be possible that this experience, of this I might call near-death experience, has any lasting impact on his mental health in the next period, or is it something that is really confined to the delirium that he might have been in?
I think it's confined to the period of his illness. He was trouble with breathlessness, and that can sometimes bring a sense of impending doom, but he certainly gave no indication of it when we saw him.
Dr. Faisal, my last question would be following up one of the last things you said before the break. You said that you didn't have any specific recommendations, however, and then you paused, and obviously I'm curious why you paused and if you would be willing to add the words which were intended after the however.
Yes, they were exactly the things that Professor Campbell said after the break, which is that the physical exercise will have a beneficial effect on slowing down any age-related cognitive changes. So I paused because it was an area that I thought Professor Campbell should comment on. But that was so it's broadly speaking a recommendation which does impact on mental health, but it's not specific mental health recommendation. It's more a recommendation for physical health, which has some beneficial effects on mental health in at least slowing down the rate of decline.
Mr. President, I have finished my questions. My national colleague would like to have the floor.
Council Son Arun. Very good morning, Mr. President and Your Honors, and good morning to you, the experts. I am Son Arun, counsel for Mr. Nuon Chea, along with my colleague who already put a few questions to you. I have a few questions for you. When you administered the tests during the 2 days period on 3 occasions, as you indicated, did you also administer your test aiming at other areas other than putting questions concerning his past experiences? I am not a professional or medical doctor. As an old-aged person, people tend to remember their pasts very well. I also conduct some tests I asked him some questions. 3 minutes or 5 minutes later, I repeated the questions and he never remembered them. Have you ever administered such tests to see whether his short-term memory is still intact?
Yes, we did. So we asked him to recall 3 objects after a period of some minutes on 2 consecutive days, and he did well on those tests, and also it was our impression that on the basis of our clinical interviews that he had a good memory of short-term events. So, for example, he would refer us back to points he had made earlier. He would, in the immediate short-term memory, he remembered our questions even if they were long. So there were various pieces of evidence that came together that suggested to us preservation of short-term memory. One issue, of course, which might explain why it differs when different people ask him questions is his mind will naturally wander. He may not be aware that a question's going to be he's going to be asked about something again, and it's common if you're not interested, for instance, in a topic or in something particular, that you don't remember it. And I think that is an experience that anyone would have, that something that's not of particular interest to them, they will forget. Professor Campbell, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's covered very well. Our impression was, in asking both issues of long-term memory and short-term memory, that he managed both short and long-term memory very satisfactorily.
Question. Regarding his physical fitness, have you obtained any documents telling you that he fell down in the bathroom before he was admitted to the hospital, and that incident alone also took the toll on his deteriorating health condition? And as my colleague just reiterated, that he on one occasion called his relatives to be near his hospital bed so that he could have his last words to them. Have you also obtained such information?
Yes, we're certainly aware that he's very unsteady on his feet, and that's mainly because he has been off his feet for so long that he's been lying on his bed. When he stands, he has very great difficulty finding his balance there. That's not because of any brain problem. It's because he's been lying flat on his back for so long. He has a condition which has been called water skiers syndrome, where he leans backwards rather than stands upright. And that can only be corrected by a process whereby he has got back on his feet by someone qualified in physical rehabilitation.
Counsel, Thank you, professors. I have a few more questions. Before he fell over, his health condition was not that bad because he could attend the proceedings in the courtroom every now and then. But after that, and again, I'm not a doctor, but my observation is that his health is worsening in the aftermath of that incident. And after that, I looked at him and inspected his waist, and I could see bruises. And I don't know whether you also included that assessment in your report. Have you examined his physical condition at that time?
Yes, I did. There's no evidence of any remaining damage from that fall that he had. It certainly would have affected his confidence with his standing and walking. And when you're not confident standing, then you do feel dizzy and you feel more unsteady. And that's the probable consequence of the fall. But there's no evidence of any physical damage, no bruising remaining, no evidence of any fracture. There's no evidence of any brain damage from his fall.
Counsel, to date, the bruises or the damages from that incident remained, and I do not agree with your accounts. Secondly, I am of an opinion that, and I feel that after visiting him at the detention facility and what he responded to us tells us that he has some lower back pain and he feels dizzy, and it is more frequent that we hear his complaints about this. Do you think that your findings correspond with what I just indicated?
No, I examined him, undressed him to examine him, and found no evidence of bruising. I examined his back, and his back is largely unchanged. He has long-standing degenerative change in his back, and that may be exacerbated by a fall, but there is no evidence of any recent damage there.
Counsel, all my questions for both of you were put because we are very concerned that Nuon Chia would not be able to return to the courtroom fully, because if he suffers from mental and physical difficulties, this makes his concentration difficult, and counsels for him are very concerned, as always. The President, Mr. Experts, could you please hold on? Co-prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me just make a brief objection that we would request that counsel be reminded that he is not here to provide his own opinions or observations. Rather, he is here to ask questions to the doctors. On a number of occasions, we've heard attempted testimony and opinions by counsel, and I would simply ask that his questions not be phrased so that he is attempting to provide evidence to the court.
Counsel, I wish to respond to the co-prosecutor. The last time Mr. Nunjia was admitted to the hospital, I remember having made a submission to the chamber to ask the chamber that the treating physicians be summoned to give testimonies before the chamber, because counsel would only obtain the medical report on a daily basis, just piece of writing, and that would not be sufficient. But the application was rejected by the chamber, and that the treating physicians were not allowed to be here in the courtroom to tell everything about the physical condition of or mental condition of my client, our client. At this moment, we do not even know whether he is genuinely fit to stand trial. That's why I put these questions to the experts to help find the answers. Otherwise, I would proceed to other means. The President, the objection is sustained. Counsel is reminded not to give your own testimonies. You are here to put questions for the experts on behalf of your client. Experts are instructed not to respond to that question, and counsel is advised to put a few more other questions, and that you are refrained from voicing your opinion rather than putting the straight questions. Counsel, thank you, Mr. President, for reminding. I have read the report filed by both experts, and I also listened to the explanation by the responses by both experts to the questions my colleague put. And I feel that I am ambivalent as to whether the responses are sufficient. Nonetheless, I have no further questions to put to the experts. I thank you, Mr. President, and Your Honors, for the floor. The President, thank you, Counsel. We would like now to hand over to the prosecution to put some questions to the experts. You may proceed.
Mr. Simon King, thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning to all parties present. And good morning to the two professors, Professor John Campbell and Dr. Sina Fazo. My first question to you, I have examined your report submitted to the trial chamber on the 20th of March 2013, particularly paragraph 10 of your report. You provide that Mr. Nguyen Chie has recently been admitted to a hospital with acute bronchitis. And in that same report, it says that there is no residual signs of chest infection. My question to you, experts, what are the causes or underlying causes of acute bronchitis? And can you please distinguish between the acute bronchitis and the chronic bronchitis?
Acute bronchitis is an acute infection of the respiratory tract, the upper respiratory tract. Commonly follows from a viral illness when your bacteria follow on the viral infection. and normally requires treatment with antibiotics. The person runs a fever, may feel short of breath, coughs up purulent sputum, and as I said, it resolves with antibiotics. Chronic bronchitis occurs in those who've smoked, and it's due to chronic low-grade inflammation of the respiratory tree, and people with chronic bronchitis are prone to get attacks of acute bronchitis on top of this. So the chronic bronchitis does not resolve fully. It's a chronic ongoing infection. Now there's no evidence of that with Nuon Chia.
Thank you. Can you enlighten the court as to whether Mr. Nuon Chia is recovering from this acute bronchitis?
When we saw him, he appeared fully recovered as far as his chest was concerned. But as I've said, any acute illness in someone as frail as Nuon Chia can leave him with residual overall weakness, which requires a time to resolve.
Thank you. If we see the overall weather condition in Cambodia, particularly sometime around December. December is the one of the coolest months of the year in Cambodia. Do you think that climate has anything to do with the health condition of Mr. Nuon Chia, particularly the acute bronchitis that he has been suffering?
I should imagine cool in Phnom Penh is not all that cool. What sort of temperature are you talking about?
Well, Professor, if we see in Cambodia, particularly in Phnom Penh, December is the coolest month of the year compared to other months throughout the year. And generally, for old age people, have certain problems when the climate change or the weather change. And people at Nuon Chia age might be prone to bronchitis when the weather gets cooler than usual.
I can't comment on that in Cambodia. I think probably more important is to ensure that he does not get influenza, for example, that he is vaccinated for influenza, and that if he does show any signs of any chest infection, then that is treated promptly with antibiotics.
Thank you. Due to the current health status of Mr. Nuon Chia, when he is lying down or he is sleeping, if you compare with the sitting position, do you observe any difference when he was lying down and he was sitting upright?
We only really saw him while he was lying down. It was an effort to sit him up to examine him.
How about your examination on his health? You said that your examination lasted for about 2 hours. When you were conducting this examination, were he lying down or he was sitting upright when you were examining him?
When we were taking his history and examining his mental state, he was lying down. For the physical examination, he moved as required for us to complete an adequate physical examination.
I think you should be explicitly say he did sit up.
Thank you. If you look at the same report, particularly paragraph 9 of your report, you state that Mr. Nguyen Chie has a history of hypertension going back over 30 years. Can you clarify the overall condition of hypertension? What is it like?
His high blood pressure is well controlled at present. As I've indicated in my report, it was 135/75, I think. 130/75, both lying and standing, so his blood pressure at present is satisfactory.
Thank you. And again, in the same report, you also stated that the blood pressure, Mr. Nguyen Chie, is 130/75, both when he was lying down and he was standing. This level of blood pressure, how do you comment on this? Is it high by standard, or how would you comment on this?
It's a very satisfactory blood pressure for a person of his age.
Thank you. And this is going to be my last question concerning your previous assessment of his health status starting from August 2011 to date. And you have produced several reports, and the last report that you submitted to the trial chamber on the 20th of March 2013. Throughout your examination of his health, have you observed any change or deterioration or so concerning the overall health status of Mr. Nguyen Chie?
As I've indicated, I think he is more frail than when I first saw him, but that is largely because of his inactivity. There is no significant sign of progression in his underlying heart, lung, or cerebrovascular problems. And his kidney function also on testing has remained reasonably stable.
Thank you very much, Professor. Mr. President, I have no further question. I would like to now cede the floor to my esteemed colleagues.
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the bench, and good morning to you, doctors. My name is Dale Lysak, and I am one of the international prosecutors. I have a few areas where I have some very short questions that I just want to clarify, and a couple of areas that I'll want to explore with you in a little more depth. Let me start with one of the short areas. It concerns the issue of the comparison of the MMSE test that was conducted last week to the results of the one from February 2011. And you've already indicated to us that the different results you don't consider to be clinically significant. But I wanted to clarify one other matter. Were either of you involved in administering the test that was conducted, the MMSE test that was conducted in February 2011, or was this conducted by some other doctor outside your presence?
No, this was conducted by another doctor, and we were not present during that examination.
And in regards to your ability to compare the test results, the report that I have that was attached to Dr. Campbell, attached to your second report that you filed with the court dated 26th of August 2011, the report that I have that you reference only contains the score 30 of 30. My question is whether you saw any more detailed information, for example, the specific questions that were asked, the results of answers that were given or results of the tests that allow you to tell us whether or not you can be certain the test was properly administered in February 2011.
Well, it's a standardized test. The questions are fixed, so there should not be any difficulty in administering it.
I understand that. My question, Professor Campbell, is did you see the actual results of the test, or did you just see the test score?
My memory is that I would just have seen the test score, but it was 30 out of 30. The person wouldn't have put any modification to the questions if they had modified the questions.
The reason I asked that, Doctor, is I recall that one of the prior times you testified here, you took issue with the way that one person had administered the test. So the reason I'm asking you is simply whether you have done anything to confirm whether or not the test was properly administered in February 2011.
No, I don't think so, but I can testify that it was properly administered in March 2013. And at this stage, shows no evidence of cognitive impairment.
Thank you, Doctor. I certainly wasn't questioning that. I simply wanted to make it very clear whether we have any basis to compare or draw any conclusions from the different test result in February 2011, where he got 30 of 30 score, to the test result that was obtained last week, where he scored 28 of 30.
No, I would certainly read no significance into that change in score.
Thank you for clarifying that. The second area that I wanted to ask a very quick question to you is concerns the vision problem of Mr. Nunchea. You've made a number of recommendations, including the possibility of documents being read to him or the size of the documents increased. My father happens to have macular degeneration, and he uses a magnifying glass to help read documents. I'm wondering whether the use of a magnifying lens of some sort is another option that the court could consider to assist Nunchea in reading documents.
It's less likely to be effective with cataracts, but it is something that could be tried.
Thank you, Professor Campbell. Let me turn now to an issue. You have indicated already that in your examinations of Nunchea, in particular with regard to his cardiovascular disease or condition, that there have not been any objective changes in his condition over the period that you have been examining him. I want to also go back, if you will, to the examinations that were conducted of Noon Chea prior to you by Dr. Antoine Lafont. And am I correct that both of you reviewed Dr. Lafont's reports in coming to your conclusions regarding Noon Chea?
Yes, I have reviewed his reports.
And Dr. Lafont, who is the Director of Interventional Cardiology from the Georges Pompidou Hospital in Paris, conducted an initial examination of Noon Chea in October 2007 and subsequently re-examined him every 6 months through until 2010. What I would like to do now is read to you a few excerpts from Dr. Lafont's report regarding Noon Chea's cardiovascular condition with the ultimate aim of seeking your opinion on whether there has been any significant change or deterioration in his cardiovascular condition since 2007 when Dr. Lafont examined him. And the first examination report from Dr. Lafont, which was dated the 20th of October 2007, and for the record, this is document D24/7. In that report, Dr. Lafont found that Noon Chea's blood pressure was 155/80, that there was no functional cardiac symptoms or signs such as angina, dyspnea, or palpitation, and that after treatment, his blood pressure was reduced to 125/76. He concluded that Noon Chea's hypertension was ancient, was the word that is used in his report, or the English translation. And he described his coronary illness as limited to an artery and stable in comparison to the data of the coronography realized 12 years ago, justifying the continuation of a simple medical treatment. And in regards to a prognosis for Noon Chea, Dr. Lafont wrote, quote, "It is difficult to foretell the future, but in light of this thorough checkup, this patient enjoys at present a real stability of pathologies from which he suffers. The hypertension is treated, the coronary illness is remarkably stable since 12 years, and the after effects of the cerebral vascular accident are ancient." End of quote. As I indicated, Dr. Lafont continued to examine Noon Chea every 6 months after that through 2010. I will not read to you each of those reports. Let me just make reference to one of them in June 11, 2009, document B27/1. Dr. Lafont wrote, quote, "In practice, the patient's health condition is stable and there has been a general improvement." And in the prognosis section, he concluded, "As already explained, it is difficult to predict the future, but in light of the various medical examinations carried out in the past 18 months, the patient's disorders are not only stable, but the last medical examination revealed an improvement in his general health condition." And Dr. Lafont confirmed in his other reports as well that there had been no change in condition. My question for you is based on your review of Dr. Lafont's reports and your examinations of Noon Chea in 2011 and this month. Can you give us your opinion as to whether his cardiovascular condition has remained relatively stable since 2007 or whether there has been any deterioration or change in that condition since 2007.
My examination is restricted to his history, and he has no history of cardiac symptoms at present, and to a physical examination, and there is no change in physical examination. Now, Dr. Lafont used additional investigations, for example, echocardiography, which we have not used. If there have been subtle changes, they would show up on that. But given that he is asymptomatic at present, there is really no justification for those additional investigations.
Is there any evidence then that there has been any deterioration in his cardiovascular disease since 2007 when he was first arrested and brought into detention at the court?
There is no clinical evidence of deterioration, but given the underlying disease, it is likely that there have been subtle progressions since then, but they're not resulting in any symptoms at present.
What type of test would one need to administer to determine whether there, in fact, have been such subtle changes that you just made reference to?
Given that he has no symptoms, there are no tests that we would use. You could repeat the echocardiogram, but it wouldn't change management. And to reinvestigate the coronary arteries would be too invasive, given that there would be no therapeutic outcome from it.
I'd like to turn now to the last subject that I want to ask you about, which relates to your prognosis that you gave earlier, and the general question of life expectancy, which is, as you can imagine, something that's been on a lot of people's minds here lately. First of all, I just wanted to follow up on the statement that you gave in response to Judge Cartwright's question. And when you were asked regarding his prognosis, one thing that you said, one concern you expressed related to his susceptibility to what you called intercurrent illness. And I'm wondering if you could just explain what you meant by intercurrent illness.
An intercurrent illness is any illness that is not one of the existing chronic illnesses. For example, if he had an episode of influenza, if he had another episode of acute bronchitis, if he had a bladder infection, then given his overall frailty, these intercurrent illnesses would have a significant effect on his well-being. They would affect him far more than they would affect you or me.
And you mentioned something in response to my colleague's questions, which was the importance of having him having an influenza vaccine. Do you know whether or not he's been vaccinated for influenza?
No, I don't.
And you stated at the end of your prognosis, first you used the words limited and guarded, and then you said, quote, we have to consider whether we would be surprised if he was not alive in 6 months, and you said you would not. I'm wondering if you could, in view of the opinions that are expressed in your report that his various medical conditions have been stable, can you tell us what objective facts you base your statement or the 6-month number that you provided in response to Judge Cartwright's question?
Yes, don't take the 6 months too literally. One cannot prognosticate with any accuracy in this situation. What I'm saying is that he is frail, that there may be problems with intercurrent illness or with his existing problems. And the question about the 6 months is one we commonly ask ourselves with people when we're determining the extent of investigation or the extent of treatment. I mean, he may well, certainly, be alive in 6 months, in a year's time. It's impossible to say.
Is there a reason that you did not put the 6-month prognosis into your written report?
Again, I want to make it clear that I'm not giving him a 6-month prognosis. It may well be longer than that. I'm not in a position to say how long he will continue to survive. But one has to realise that at 86, with underlying cardiovascular disease, cerebrovascular disease, underlying frailty, life is precarious.
Did you provide Noon Chea with this prognosis or this opinion regarding the 6-month period when you examined and consulted him?
No, that was not my role, and I think we need to move on from that 6 months. It's not a prognosis that I'm giving him.
I will move on from and not mention the 6 months anymore. Let me ask you a more general question. Would your prognosis for him depend on whether or not he resumed physical activity and undertook some sort of rehabilitation problem? Would that affect your assessment of his likelihood of surviving?
As we've said in the report, if he could undertake some physical activity, this would increase his chances of surviving further, would increase his physiological reserve, which at present is diminished. But he, of course, would have to be willing to undertake it, and he may well not be.
As we are talking about admittedly a uncertain and difficult area, which is the prognosis of life expectancy, I wanted to ask you, as an expert in geriatrics, do you have some familiarity or understanding with the statistics or science of life expectancy and the use of life tables?
Yes, but they're not particularly useful when one comes down to the individual, especially with a number of comorbidities, as here.
Mr. President, I'd like at this time to hand a couple of reports to the experts. One is a national vital statistics report issued by the CDC that contains life tables for the United States. And the second one closer to home for you, Dr. Campbell, are the life tables issued for New Zealand, issued by the Statistics New Zealand government agency. I have copies of these for the experts. I have copies of them for the parties and for the chamber itself too, if you wish to see the documents yourself.
The President, International Co-Counsel for Mr. Noon Chea, you may now proceed. Perhaps the matter is straying far from the medical report, perhaps.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have to object to this presenting of documents that we are not aware of. A part, of course, of the relevance of these reports in respect of our client, who is a Cambodian national, and has nothing to do with statistics covering the United States or New Zealand. So I'm convinced that the expert will be able to say that he doesn't know anything about this, or he cannot say anything intelligently on this subject in respect of Nguyen Chia, but nevertheless we would object to this line of questioning following the presentation of these documents.
Mr. President, perhaps I can ask a few more general questions to the expert, which I think will amply demonstrate why this information may be of use both to the experts and to the Chamber in the decisions that it has to make. And I appreciate that your qualification about the 6-month period, but I hope you understand that that statement is going to be picked up and viewed as rather significant. And because of that, I wish to ask you whether you, as a geriatrician, are familiar with the general or statistical expected life expectancy of an 86-year-old man in New Zealand.
The President. Experts, could you please hold on? Counsel for Mr. Nguyen Chia, you may now proceed first.
I have raised an objection, Your Honor, and I would like you to rule on it.
The President. The objection concerning the presentation of the document and the current question by the co-prosecutor, which is more hypothetical regarding a case in New Zealand, is sustained. Therefore, both the question and the request for submitting the document are not granted. The experts are instructed not to respond to the question.
Professor Campbell, since you threw out the 6-month figure and indicated your view to this chamber that you would not be surprised if Nguyen Chia was not alive in 6 months. In providing that opinion, did you take account of the typical life expectancies of persons of that age?
Typical life expectancies don't apply to individuals. They're population-based life expectancies. And I think we need to move away from that 6 months. I said that's a question we commonly ask ourselves about patients. didn't apply particularly to Nuon Chia or his prognosis. Would I be surprised if he wasn't alive in 6 months? No. Would I be surprised if he was alive in 6 months? No.
The President, the question is rather repetitive, and the experts appear to have already responded to the questions, and it appears to us that co-prosecutor has no more question. Counsel for Mr. Nuon Chia, could you advise the chamber as to how much time would you need to make your final submission concerning this particular juncture of the hearing?
Mr. President, Your Honours, I'm doubting whether we will make submissions at all. So if we do, they're going to be very short indeed.
The President, Mr. Co-Prosecutor, could you also please advise the chamber to the as to how much time would you need for the closing statement, as counsel may be brief on that?
We can be very brief as well, Your Honor. We will submit in writing these documents for you. I respect your ruling. I will not pursue the matter at the time, but we will submit these documents for your consideration. But in terms of argument, we can be very short as well.
The President, what about lead co-lawyers for the civil party? Would you wish to have some questions for the experts? If you do, how much time would you need? First, it's about time for questioning, and also the chamber would like to know how much time would you need for closing, for final words as well. Counsel Pekong, Mr. President, co-lead lawyers for the civil parties may need 25 minutes for question and answers, and we may need just very brief time for the second question you asked. The President, thank you very much indeed. It is now appropriate time for the land adjournment, although we are now 10 minutes, it's 10 minutes past 12. We may adjourn now, and the next session will be resumed by 1:30. And at the same time, the Chamber also notes that great progress has been made during the session. It is more expeditious than we anticipated. Security personnel are now instructed to bring Mr. Kyu Sompon from the detention facility to the courtroom before the next session resumes, so that we can have his participation in the next hearing as relevant to the topic noted to the chamber this morning. And court officer is now instructed to assist both the experts and have them return to the courtroom by 1:30.
Sure.